Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Pete here. Pete, you've been behind so many incredible songs and albums for years. I mean, as somebody who was leading A&R at an incredibly important label, Atlantic Records, and then now building your own company, which you're working on an original podcast. You've got A&R Consulting. You're helping out with writing. I mean, so many different areas in the music space. You've just been somebody who's wanted to have an influence in this category and really had a great positive influence in this area. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben. Good to be here.
Awesome. So, Pete, kind of going back to the beginning, how did your interest in music as a passion of yours, and then as like more of a career, like how did you decide I want to spend my life in the music space?
I just started very passionately listening to music when I was a kid, and I never had the interest of becoming a musician, becoming a songwriter, becoming an artist to perform in front of the stage. But I was always fascinated about why certain things succeed musically, and I would listen very, very intensely as a kid and say, this song would be a hit if they did this, this, and this, and this. And all my other little 13-year-old friends thought I was weird. But I realized that, somewhere out there, somebody was doing this. And though that was helping some of these songs get on the radio and become hits. And so I started becoming a DJ when I was in high school, so that I could literally afford to go out and buy some records. So every week I'd play a party, I'd make $100, go out and buy some records, and really enjoyed it. And was doing kind of field testing where if you played a song and people liked it, they would dance. If you played a song and people didn't like it, they would give you the finger and walk out of the room. So it was like, okay, this is a hit because they're dancing. This is not a hit because I just got cursed at, right? So when I went to college, I'm like, oh, I love DJing. I want to be a DJ. I want to look for a college with a good radio station. And so I found a college in Connecticut that had a good radio station. And little did I know that not only did it have a good radio station, but it was also a pretty good college. And first day, freshman year, I'm 17 years old, and I meet a guy on my freshman hall. And he's like, oh, you're interested in the music business. One day you should meet my friend. His dad's a big shot in the music business. And that led to me doing A&R for his friend's dad, who was a big shot 5 years later.
Mm-hmm. So, I definitely understand how it developed, but how did your skill set for determining what could be a hit and what wouldn't be a hit ultimately develop even more? Because you had ideas when you were younger, but how did that kind of get proved out as you went?
Well, it's always the whole concept of doing A&R, which stands for Artists and Repertoire. It's the division at a record company that's responsible for signing the artists and figuring out what material they're going to record. If they write their own material, you help them make that material the best it can be. If they don't write, you have to go out to songwriters and find the songs for them, right? So I just spent a whole kind of lifetime from being a kid listening to every hit song that was ever released. So as a result of that, I was able to almost like build a filing cabinet in my brain where any new song that I heard would be filtered through that filing cabinet. And well, these songs were hits. So if all these songs were hits, does this new song kind of fit that format, fit that template? And I was able to get in a room with somebody who said, what do you think of this song? What do you think of that song? What do you think of this song? And I guess they liked my answers well enough to give me a shot. And that was 35 years ago, and it's still going strong.
Mm-hmm. Would you say there's a recipe for how to make a song a hit? Like there's certain things that you can do. There's a way you can structure the song, maybe the intro portion, the way that it repeats itself that generally can lend to things that become more successful? Or is it just kind of random?
No, the whole idea is, what does the audience want to hear, even if they don't know they want to hear it, right? So that's my job, is to connect the song or to connect the artist with the audience and project. It's no different than any other business. If you're in the business of designing shoes or sneakers, it's like, what do those consumers want? It's the same thing, and sometimes they may know what they want. Sometimes they may not know what they want. But, kind of having this lifetime of listening behind me, it's like, well, if this was a hit and this was a hit, if we took this song and did A, B, and C to it, that could be a hit too.
Hmm. Makes sense. Yeah, and I mean, you listened for years, so you definitely knew what was happening. So, how did what do you think you did in A&R that enabled you to become the president of A&R at Atlantic Records? Was there certain things that you maybe discovered there, or artists you helped bring in? Like, what do you think enabled you to get to that point?
Again, by the time I got to Atlantic, I had 20 years of experience. And some of it was at the major label level, some of it was at the independent level, but it was always about working with artists, trying to pair them with the great material, the A and the R, and then getting lucky enough where some of that worked really well. And it turned out that some of the projects that I was fortunate to work on were huge successes. And in this business, when you have a huge success, everybody wants a part of you. Unfortunately, hot doesn't last forever. And one of my old bosses used to have a great quote. She said, after hot comes cold, and when you're cold, nobody wants you. So you have to strike while the iron's hot when those phone calls are coming.
Well, what were some of your favorite songs that were those successes?
The biggest one was a song called Smooth with Carlos Santana and Rob Thomas.
Hmm.
And that not only turned out to be the comeback, record of the century for Carlos Santana, who hadn't had a hit record in a long time, but it also, ended up leading the album that we made, Supernatural, to winning 9 Grammys, to selling over 35 million albums worldwide, and to becoming one of the biggest songs of all time. And again, if there was a formula to doing that, I'd be doing it every day. But sometimes you get lucky where the thing that you think is going to work actually works. But, more times than not, you think it's going to work and it doesn't. And I sometimes use the analogy of baseball, where the greatest hitter in baseball history was Ted Williams, who batted 400. That means that every 10 times he was up, he still made an out 6 out of 10 times.
Hmm.
And he's the greatest of all time. So if we're batting 400, we're in the Hall of Fame.
Right, right. Didn't Jordan missed, I think, like more than half the shots, game-winning shots, and he was considered like one of the best. So I
Yeah,
mean,
nobody talks about the shots he missed.
right. So, how did that song specifically come together? Was it what was your role in that?
I mean, that was, I sometimes think of it as it was my George Bailey It's a Wonderful Life moment, if you've seen that movie, because if I had never been born, that song wouldn't exist, and I'll tell you why.
Mm.
Um, I was working on the Santana album that became Supernatural, and I had to finish. I was kind of told that, playtime's over. You've spent enough money. This album's coming out, whether you're finished or not. And I needed to finish it. And they wanted to get it out for the fiscal year, and the fiscal year was in June, and this was in January, and I still felt like I was one song shy, and like a first single shy. And this was after a year and a half of working on the record. I get a call from a great old friend of mine. His name is Jerry Griffith. And Jerry is an A&R guy who, has been through the A&R wars like I have. He worked for Clive Davis at Arista Records and is actually responsible for introducing Clive Davis to Whitney Houston. When I worked at Arista, Jerry had left Arista, but he was still my consigliere. Whenever I had an issue, I would call him up and say, help me figure out, the enigmatic Clive Davis. I need to figure this one out. And he would help me. One day he called me at around the same time that I was told I had to finish up the record. And he said, hey, are you still working on Santana? Do you need any more songs? And I said, yeah, I kind of need one song. He's like, well, I may be managing this kid. He's a songwriter. His name's Ital Shore. Can I send him to you? He told me he may have an idea for Santana. So Ital comes up and he plays me the song that he's written called Room 17. And I listen to the song and I'm like, there's good news, bad news. The music is amazing, but the lyric is horrible, and the
Mm.
lyric is never going to work for Carlos Santana. So give me the music, and I'll get a great song out of it. I'll get a better songwriter, a lyricist to write to your great track. And he said no.
Ah.
He said my song's great, and I said no, it isn't. And we started yelling at each other. Eventually, through attrition, I wore him out. He gave me the track. And I called up a friend of mine and I said, hey, you're a music publisher. You work with great lyric writers. Let me play you something. And I played him the song over the phone, the track. And he's like, I know who can write to that. And I said, who? He said, Rob Thomas. I said, Rob Thomas from Matchbox 20. This is 1999 now, right? So nobody really knew who Rob was at the time. They knew who Matchbox 20 was, but not really Rob. And he said, Pete, Rob's the best songwriter I've ever signed. You got to give him a shot. So we sent the track to Rob. And what we didn't know is that Rob's fiance at the time, who's now his wife, is Spanish. So when he heard this Spanish groove, he decided to write a love letter to Marisol, his fiance, and that was smooth. And so after some tweaks and going back and rewrites and turning pre-chorus choruses into pre-choruses and jumping through all the hoops that I put up for them, we were finally ready to present this song to the great Clive Davis. And if Clive Davis said this song stinks, that would be it. It would never see the light of day. But to my surprise, one listen, Clive loved it. And then he said to me, what does Carlos Santana think of the song? And I said, I haven't sent it to him yet, Clive, because, you're the boss. If you don't like the song, I'm not, doesn't matter if he likes it. He's like, I love it. Send it to him. So I'm feeling great. I kind of breathed a sigh of relief and I sent it to Carlos. He calls back. He's like, I hate this song. I will never sing this song. I will never record this song. Hate, 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 hate.
Wow.
And luckily, I was able to convince him with Clive Davis's help that he should give it a shot, and he did. And it became the biggest song of his career.
Wow. So he didn't want to do it, and it became the biggest song of his career. How about that?
Yeah, and then he called me to apologize. I said, you don't have to call me to apologize. You're doing your job. I'm doing my job. And we compromise, and you do the song. And he basically, he said, no, you were right. I'm going to be playing this song for the rest of my life. Thank you. So that was awesome.
That is awesome. Did you feel like you were able to really build great real relationships within the industry, because it can be intense, can be cutthroat at times? Did you feel like you were able to do that with some of these artists you're connecting with?
It's really important where you have to be a straight shooter, you have to be honest, and you have to be a decent person, because deep down, that's what is going to help you have longevity in a business of relationships. Again, not just music, any business. So I'm very fortunate that 35 years in, I can pretty much, pick up the phone and call any artist I've ever worked with and, have a great conversation with them because we always left on good terms.
That's great. I mean, like financially, everything was kind of taken care of by the label, so you probably didn't really have to deal. I don't know how much you had to deal with that. Sometimes that can lead to big disputes.
Yeah, I was the creative guy. So they kind of left me alone in my little song sandbox to work with my songwriters. And, sometimes they would say, oh, Pete's the guy who goes to the studio and says, needs a little more bass. So, but, if that's the job, I'll take it.
How much different today is A&R compared to when you began?
Well, a lot of it now is research oriented and algorithm oriented because there is so much music out there because anyone can release any music, right? Like you could, take your phone and you can, hum a song and it'll be on, Apple Music or Amazon Music or Spotify in 10 minutes. That doesn't mean it's any good, right? So a lot of the A&R people, their job is just to kind of control this tsunami of unsigned music that is being blitzed on the number of hundreds of thousands of songs per day to see which ones are raising their hands. In the old day, it was like, Prince would show up and he's like, I don't have any algorithm. I'm just amazing, and you would say, yeah, you are. And it would take not only one album, but 2 albums, 3 albums, 4 albums, and a lot of patience and investment for the artist to kind of find their audience. And if you look at the greatest artists of all time, whether they're Prince or Bob Dylan or U2 or Bruce Springsteen, or REM, they would find their audience over time because they would make an album, they would go out and they would tour that album. And they would build this audience. First time into a city, 200 people. Next time, all those 200 people are bringing 2 friends. So it's 600 people. And the writing gets influenced by the interaction with these people in the audience. So the writing gets better because the artist can see, well, if I play this song live and I put this part in, that's when the audience gets really excited. So that informs the songwriting process for the next record. And it just gets better and better. And you have to have patience. Because if somebody decided to drop Bruce Springsteen after the first album, there would never have been a Born to Run.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah. That patience is something I feel like today it's maybe not as easy to have, with the amount of artists and just things going on.
Yeah, and the fact that a lot of the bigger record companies are now owned by bigger corporations, who have to care more about the stock price and the shareholders than they do about the artistic integrity of, of an act who wants to build organically over 3 or 4 albums.
Mm-hmm. How have you seen the process what are some of the criteria you've looked at when you're identifying new talent or trying to bring on talent just in general? Because I think a big piece of this is identifying new talent that is really undiscovered and that you can bring into your fold in your group. There's kind of all these different stories, but what have you kind of looked for when looking for new talent?
It's always about, can I shut my eyes and imagine this artist on stage headlining Madison Square Garden, even if this first showcase they're doing for me is me, them, and the bartender, and nobody else is here, right? So you have to have a leap of faith. And going back to our Ted Williams, Michael Jordan example, the leap of faith is not always going to go in the basket or not always go over the fence, right? So it's like, when I look through some old, files and boxes, because I don't throw anything away, of artists that I signed 15 years ago or something, I'm like, oh my God, I don't even remember that artist. But there was one time where I shut my eyes and I thought that they could have been a headliner. You don't know until the public has a chance to speak. Sometimes the public, like when I was a 16-year-old DJ, sometimes the public will rush to the dance floor and not want to stop dancing. And sometimes they'll all leave the room and leave you and your artist alone with the bartender.
Mm-hmm. What were your favorite talent signs?
Like a sign from the talent themselves to show me that they should be signed to my label.
Yeah, that, and then also just which talent did you like? Were you most proud of that you signed in general to the label?
Yeah, I think that one of my favorite artists that I signed was not an artist at all.
Uh-huh.
It was this creative guy who I just thought was a genius. And he was in the space of musical theater writing. He wasn't in a band. And I remember when I was a kid, I used to listen to musical theater records all the time. And, the cast of a chorus line and things like that. And I'm like, it's pop music. Music is music. Nobody cares if it's pop or rock or Broadway. It's like if it's good music, they'll listen to it. So I got introduced to this guy and I said to him when I was getting to Atlantic, I said, whatever you do next, I'm such a fan. I would be honored to be your partner and bring this into Atlantic Records. And a few years later, I got the call that he had something new, and that was a show called Hamilton, and that was Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I'm very proud of that because not only is it now the best-selling musical cast album of all time, it's the first musical cast album that has sold over 10 million copies and been certified diamond. But from a business perspective, when you're signing an artist and you're spending marketing money, you're spending money to tour them, you're spending money to make videos, you're spending money to promote them in a way that the dollars keep going out. With Hamilton, the show was already up and running. That was the promotional vehicle. We didn't have to put it on tour. So the costs were really low in promoting that record, and it ended up being one of the most profitable projects in Atlantic Records history. So that was another win. So I'm super proud of that.
Is that mainly like the role today, Pete, of the record label? Like you mentioned, anyone can put a song out in the world, right? Is it to just Is it to kind of put together a quality album, quality songs, and then just help with the promotion, whether it's music videos and touring, and kind of run that whole side of things? Like what is the role today of the record label?
It's basically whatever the artist needs, right? And artist needs are different today than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It used to be that the artist needed the help of the record label to get the music into a record store. Mm-hmm. All right, well, record stores, they exist now, but they don't mean what they meant 30 years ago. It used to be that an artist would need the help of a record label to help get the music on the radio,
Mhm.
right? Radio still exists, but it doesn't mean what it meant 30 years ago, right? So now the record label needs to pivot and bring in people who have different skill sets than radio promotion or physical retail salesmen. So everything is evolving and adapting, and what you need the experts at the record label to help you find your audience and grow your business, and that's the role of the record company in 2025.
Well, what made you want to leave the kind of traditional world and launch your own company in the music space?
I think that what I found as an employee, you're not an owner,
Mhm.
right? So anything else, the the success that you're having is more as somebody who's leasing or somebody who's renting. Um, Different from my record company work, I also have a music publishing company where we're in the business of working with songwriters and signing songwriters and working on their with them on their songwriting, compositions, copyrights. That's an ownership business, and when you find a songwriter and you're able to develop them the same way that you're developing an artist, but you're partners with them in the ownership of the copyrights, and then one of them writes a song that's an all-time evergreen standard, that's an income stream for them and for you as the publisher for the rest of your life. So I realized, okay, I've been doing this as a renter for a long time. Now, let's pursue ownership, and so far so good.
Hmm. And you found that like this is a model that's maybe that's working a lot better for the artist and for you as well, and like kind of benefits both because you could probably get them into places maybe they can't.
Yeah, after 35 years, like you said, the relationships are really important. And so if somebody needs a phone call made or somebody needs this producer to produce up their demo, that's an easy phone call for me to make.
Hmm. And what's like kind of the long term vision right now for your business? Like what where do you see this going?
I think it's to build up the assets. So right now, as a publisher, I publish probably somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 songs that I own. I'd love for that to be 10x, so I could have 15,000 to 20,000 songs. Because, if you bet on the right writers and those writers are prolific, there's no reason you can't have that many songs, as long as you're betting right, you know. And the same thing goes with the artists who are signed to my record company. And the same thing goes for my podcast, which I own outright now, where, this week we're putting out our 50th episode. I'd like to be putting out our 500th episode, you know. So that's all ownership.
Yeah. Do you see yourself moving into like managing a lot more types of artists? Do you even see this as like a management play in general at all?
I don't like management. I like, the managers get the calls at 3 in the morning that the bus broke down. I don't want to get those calls.
Uh-huh.
You know, the publisher gets the call like, hey, do you think you can get my song in a TV commercial? Sure, no problem. And sure enough, last night I'm watching TV and I hear this song on a car commercial and it sounds really familiar to me. I'm like, oh, that's my writer. I own that song. That's awesome. So that's better than getting the 3 o'clock, the bus is broken down phone call.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean it's a much more intense job, many aspects, but it's just the time wise, it's kind of crazy. And I think you see that's why some people are shifting out of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for everybody. Those who do it and love it are great at it, and God bless them.
Yeah, 100%. So just kind of the last question I have, like if you look at the trends today, music wise, I mean they're always changing. What people like, the styles that people like. Where do you kind of see that going, and what now are you do you think are kind of some niches to create songs around?
I think that people like what they like. At the end of the day, it's still got to be something that you can hum in the shower a week after you hear it, right? So you can talk about this trend or that trend, but it always brings me back to the song itself, to the copyright, to the underlying composition. Is this a song that people are going to be humming, on their way to work? And whether it's a rock song or a pop song or a Broadway song or a country song or, there's some, new genre born every minute, the song still has to serve the genre. The song will exist long after the genre has moved on to the next genre, you know. So I would always bet big on the copyright itself and the strength of the songwriter.
Mhm. Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Well, Pete, thanks for taking the time and doing this. I think you've had some amazing contributions to the world of music that I'm sure have touched millions and millions of people around the globe, and that I'm confident you'll continue to have that with this new model you've got, which is really interesting too. So thanks for coming on and wishing much success.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Ben. Thank you.